Veltar commanded the Zephyrian fleet from his flagship and felt the fear radiating from the human mining station through his bioelectric senses. His species could taste emotions like humans could taste food, and the terror coming from the trapped miners was sweet and satisfying. He had conquered 17 different species across the galaxy, and humans would be the 18th to fall before his superior tactics and technology. The Zephyrian commander studied the mining station through his ship's sensors and saw that it was poorly defended with only basic shields and no weapons worth mentioning. The humans had built it for digging valuable metals from asteroids and had never expected it to face military attack. This would be an easy victory, and the prisoners would bring good prices on the slave markets. His fleet of 47 ships moved in, perfect coordination around the station like a school of predatory fish surrounding wounded prey. Each vessel was armed with plasma weapons and bioelectric disruptors that could shut down both electronic systems and organic nervous systems at the same time. No species had ever found an effective defense against Zephyrian technology. The biointerface that connected Veltar directly to his ship's system suddenly screamed warnings about a massive gravitational distortion approaching from the outer edge of the star system. The readings made no sense because they showed something larger than any ship that should be able to exist. The laws of physics said that anything that big would collapse under its own gravity. Ben Carter aboard the Goliath intercepted the alien communications and listened to their confusion through his translation equipment. The Zephyrians were calling the human ship impossible, and some of their words did not translate properly because they had no equivalent in any known language. Fear was creeping into their transmissions for the first time in their military history. The alien fleet turned away from the mining station to face this new threat, and their formations shifted from confident attack patterns to defensive arrangements. Veltar felt something he had never experienced before in all his years of conquest, and it took him several moments to recognize the emotion as genuine terror. His biosensors were telling him that death was approaching. Captain Morrison opened a channel to the alien fleet, and his words were translated by the ship's quantum processors into bioelectric patterns that the Zephyrians could understand. His voice carried across space to every enemy vessel, and the message was simple and clear. The aliens had attacked human civilians, and they had one chance to withdraw or face the consequences. Veltar's pride burned hotter than his fear, and he refused to retreat from creatures that his species had never heard of before today. The Zephyrians had ruled this part of the galaxy for thousands of years, and no upstart species would challenge their dominance. He ordered his entire fleet to attack formation and prepared to destroy the impossible mountain that dared to threaten them. The first wave of plasma bolts from the Zephyrian fleet struck the Goliath shields and created brilliant flashes of light that could be seen from the mining station. The humans inside the station watched through their viewports and hoped that their rescuers would survive the alien attack. The plasma weapons had destroyed entire fleets in previous battles. Ryan Wells reported from his weapons station that the shields were holding at nearly full strength, and the alien attack had barely registered on their defensive systems. The Goliath's quantum shields were designed to absorb and redirect energy attacks, and the Zephyrian weapons were actually making the shields stronger by feeding them more power to work with. The massive human warship continued its approach without slowing down or changing course, and this impossible behavior sent waves of panic through the alien fleet. Every species they had ever fought had either retreated or been destroyed by their opening attack, but the mountain that moved through space seemed completely unaffected by their most powerful weapons. Captain Morrison gave the order to return fire, and Ryan Wells selected the ship's railgun batteries for the first response. These weapons fired solid projectiles at significant fractions of light speed, and each round carried enough kinetic energy to vaporize anything it hit. The Goliath had 60 of these weapons, and they could fire once every 3 seconds. The first salvo from the human ship crossed the distance to the alien fleet in less than 2 seconds and struck 6 Zephyrian vessels before they could react. The projectiles passed completely through their shields and armor and hulls like they were made of paper, and the ship simply disintegrated into clouds of glowing plasma and twisted metal. Veltar watched in disbelief as some of his best ships were destroyed by weapons that seemed to ignore every defense they had. His biointerface was overloading from the shock of seeing his supposedly invincible fleet torn apart by creatures that used primitive kinetic weapons instead of sophisticated energy beams. The second salvo destroyed 8 more ships, and the third took out another, 10 before the surviving Zephyrians began to scatter in all directions. Their perfect formations dissolved into chaos as individual captains tried to save their own ships instead of following fleet orders. The bioelectric network that coordinated their attacks collapsed under the weight of fear and confusion. Maria Santos monitored galactic communication networks from her station and reported that other species were watching the battle through long-range sensors and spy satellites. Word was spreading quickly that someone was finally fighting back against the Zephyrian raiders and winning. 17 different civilizations were sending urgent diplomatic messages to Earth. The mining station commander sent a transmission to the Goliath thanking them for the rescue and asking if they needed any assistance. Captain Morrison smiled at the offer, because the tiny mining station was asking if it could help the most powerful warship ever built by humans. He politely declined but appreciated the gesture. Kate Phillips tracked the fleeing alien ships and reported that 15 vessels were attempting to escape the system at maximum speed. Captain Morrison ordered his crew to let them go, because they would carry news of this battle to the rest of the galaxy. The Zephyrians needed to understand that humanity was not helpless prey. But the battle was not over yet because something new was emerging from the debris field where the destroyed ships had been. A massive Zephyrian dreadnought twice the size of their normal vessels was powering up its weapons and preparing for a final desperate attack against the human ship that had humiliated their fleet. The Zephyrian dreadnought emerged from the wreckage of the destroyed fleet like some ancient monster rising from the depths of an ocean, and its massive hull was covered with weapons and armor stolen from a dozen different conquered civilizations. Veltar had transferred his command to this ship when he realized that his fleet was being destroyed, and now he prepared to use the most powerful weapon in Zephyrian military history. The dreadnought was 3 times larger than any other ship in the alien fleet, and it carried technology that had been collected from every species the Zephyrians had defeated over the centuries. Bioelectric cannons that could shut down entire nervous systems were mounted next to plasma weapons that burned hot enough to melt through asteroid armor and energy shields that had never been penetrated by any known weapon. Claire Adams studied the new threat from her science station aboard the Goliath, and her instruments showed energy readings that were far beyond anything they had detected from the smaller ships. The dreadnought was charging some kind of weapon that operated on bioelectric principles, and her computer models suggested it could disable both organic life and electronic systems at the same time. Veltar connected his bio-interface directly to the dreadnought's main weapon and poured all of his hatred and fury into the targeting system. This cannon had destroyed the last defenders of 16 different worlds, and no species had ever survived a direct hit from its concentrated bioelectric discharge. The humans would learn why the Zephyrians ruled this part of the galaxy. The weapon charged for 30 seconds while massive capacitors built up enough energy to power an entire city, and bioelectric generators drew power from the life force of captured prisoners held in the ship's lower decks. The cannon was not just a weapon but a torture device that used the pain and terror of victims to make its attacks more powerful and deadly. Captain Morrison watched the alien dreadnought prepare its attack and ordered his crew to brace for impact, but he did not change course or speed. The Goliath continued its approach toward the massive enemy vessel like an unstoppable force of nature, and the crew prepared to test their defensive systems against the most feared weapon in known space. The bioelectric cannon fired with a sound that traveled through space itself and created a writhing beam of blue-white energy that crackled with the power to end civilizations. The weapon had never failed to destroy its target, and Veltar was already planning how he would torture the surviving humans before selling them on the slave markets. The energy beam struck the Goliath dead center on its forward shields, and the entire ship was surrounded by crackling electricity that danced across its hull like living lightning. The weapon discharge was so powerful that it could be seen from the mining station several million kilometers away, and the miners were certain that their rescuers had been destroyed. But when the energy faded and space became clear again, the Goliath emerged from the attack completely unharmed, and its shields were actually stronger than they had been before the weapon hit them. The massive human warship continued its approach without even slowing down, and its crew calmly prepared for their Response to the alien attack, Amy? Turner analyzed the weapon discharge from her xenobiology station and quickly understood why their ship had survived when no other species ever had. The bioelectric cannon was designed to interface directly with organic nervous systems and electronic components that were based on biological principles but human. Technology was completely artificial. Every other species in the galaxy had evolved technology that worked with their natural biology, and their ships and weapons and computers all used some form of bioelectric interface. But humans had built everything from scratch using pure synthetic materials and quantum processors that had no biological components at all. The alien weapon had actually fed energy into their systems. Danny Brooks reported from the engine room that the alien attack had somehow increased their power output by 15%, and all systems were running better than normal. The bioelectric discharge had been absorbed by their quantum matrices and converted into useful energy that made their shields and weapons more effective than ever before. Veltar could not believe what his sensors were telling him, and he ran diagnostic checks on all his equipment to make sure it was working properly. No ship had ever survived a direct hit from his main weapon, and certainly none had emerged stronger than before. His biointerface was sending him error messages that made no sense in any known language. The truth began to dawn on the Zephyrian commander as he studied the readings from his attack and realized that these humans had built technology that was completely independent of biological systems. Every other species they had conquered used bioelectric interfaces because that was the natural way that intelligent life developed, but humans had chosen a different path entirely. Captain Morrison opened another communication channel to the alien dreadnought, and his translated words carried a mixture of respect for their powerful weapon and confidence in his ship's superior design. He acknowledged that their cannon was impressive and offered to demonstrate human weapons technology. In return for the educational experience they had just provided, the Goliath's main weapon was an antimatter cannon that ran the entire length of the 12-kilometer ship and used magnetic containment fields to focus pure annihilation into a beam that could cut through planets. The weapon required the power output of 3 fusion reactors and took 60 seconds to charge, but when it fired, nothing in the known universe could survive a direct hit. Nick Davis coordinated the firing sequence from his security station and watched as massive blast doors sealed off sections of the ship to protect the crew from radiation leakage. The antimatter cannon was the most dangerous weapon humanity had ever built, and using it required careful preparation to prevent it from destroying the ship that fired it. Energy readings from the Goliath spiked beyond anything the Zephyrian sensors could measure properly, and their instruments began shutting down to prevent overloads. Beltar realized that he had made a terrible mistake in challenging these humans, and he broadcast surrender signals on all frequencies while trying to retreat to a safe distance, but Captain Morrison had already made his decision about how to respond to the alien attack on innocent civilians, and the galaxy needed to understand that humanity would not tolerate threats to their people. He gave the order to fire, and the antimatter cannon began its final charging sequence while the crew prepared to demonstrate the true power of human engineering. The weapon reached full charge and the targeting system locked onto the alien dreadnought while Veltar watched helplessly as his ship's systems failed one by one under the influence of exotic radiation from the charging cannon. He knew that death was coming, and there was nothing he could do to prevent it from arriving in the next few seconds. The antimatter cannon fired with a flash of light that briefly outshone the system's star and sent a beam of pure annihilation racing across space toward the Zephyrian dreadnought at nearly the speed of light. Beltar closed his bioelectric senses and prepared for death, but instead of destroying his ship, the beam passed just meters from his hull, and the exotic radiation scrambled every system aboard his vessel. The near miss was not an accident, but a calculated demonstration of human precision and mercy that left the alien commander floating helplessly in a dead ship while the Goliath approached like a mountain moving through the void. Veltar realized that the humans could have vaporized him instantly, but had chosen to disable his vessel instead of destroying it completely. Power systems throughout the dreadnought went offline one by one as the antimatter radiation continued to interfere with bioelectric circuits and organic computer networks. The ship that had terrorized 17 civilizations was now nothing more than a floating metal shell with no weapons or shields or life support systems functioning properly. Captain Morrison ordered the Goliath's hangar bay doors to open, and Sam Hughes led a rescue mission to retrieve the surviving aliens from their disabled ship. The Marine colonel had fought in 3 different wars, but he had never captured enemies who looked like the Zephyrians with their scaled skin and bioelectric organs that glowed through translucent flesh. The rescue shuttle docked with the alien dreadnought, and Hughes found Veltar and his surviving officers floating in emergency breathing masks, while their ship slowly died around them. The Zephyrian commander expected to be tortured or executed, but instead the human Marines provided medical assistance and brought them aboard the Goliath as honored guests rather than prisoners. Veltar was brought to the main conference room where Captain Morrison waited with his senior officers, and the alien commander was surprised to find that his biosenses detected no hatred or cruelty from the humans. Instead, he felt something that confused him because it seemed like respect for a worthy opponent who had fought bravely, even though he had been completely outmatched. Amy Turner studied the Zephyrian prisoners with scientific curiosity, and her instruments detected the bioelectric organs that made their technology possible. Every cell in their bodies could generate and manipulate electrical fields, and their nervous systems were living computers that could interface directly with their ships and weapons and communication networks. The human captain spoke to Veltar through translation devices that converted his words into bioelectric patterns the alien could understand, and his message was both simple and profound. The Zephyrians had terrorized the galaxy for centuries by preying on species that could not match their bioelectric technology, but they had never encountered a civilization that had developed completely artificial systems. Maria Santos reported from her communication station that news of the battle was spreading across the galaxy faster than anyone had expected, and 17 different species were requesting immediate diplomatic contact with Earth. The defeat of a Zephyrian fleet had sent shockwaves through civilizations that had lived in fear of the raiders for generations. Veltar struggled to understand how the humans had built technology without using biological components, because every intelligent species in the galaxy had evolved the same way. Bioelectric organs were the foundation of all advanced technology, and no civilization had ever developed space travel or weapons without them. Humans were an impossibility that challenged everything he believed. Dr. Turner explained that Earth had not provided humans with natural bioelectric capabilities or enhanced physical abilities, or any of the advantages that other species took for granted. Instead, they had been forced to build everything themselves using raw intelligence and determination and synthetic materials that did not exist anywhere else in the galaxy. The revelation hit Veltar like a physical blow, because it meant that humans had accomplished in a few thousand years what had taken other species millions of years to achieve. They had built interstellar civilization from nothing using only their minds and their hands, and their refusal to accept limitations that seemed impossible to overcome. Danny Brooks appeared on the conference room screen from the engine room and reported that they were receiving priority transmissions from Earth Command about the galactic response to their battle. Every major civilization was calling for emergency peace talks, and some species were offering military alliances against common enemies that threatened all intelligent life. Captain Morrison explained to the Zephyrian commander that humans had developed artificial intelligence and quantum computers and synthetic materials because they had no choice in the matter. Earth was a dangerous world that had forced them to become toolmakers and problem solvers and builders of things that had never existed before in the history of the universe. The implications of human technology began to sink in as Veltar realized that bioelectric weapons and neural interfaces and organic computers were all useless against a species that had built everything from scratch using pure synthetic materials. Humans were immune to most alien weapons simply because their technology operated on completely different principles. Claire Adams analyzed data from the battle and explained that human ships and weapons and defensive systems were actually strengthened by bioelectric attacks because their quantum matrices could absorb and convert alien energy discharges into useful power. The more advanced the alien technology, the more energy humans could harvest from failed attacks against their vessels. The Goliath turned toward Earth while carrying its alien passengers, and the galaxy buzzed with unprecedented diplomatic activity. A species that had never spoken to each other began forming alliances and trade agreements. The defeat of the Zephyrians had changed the balance of power in ways that would reshape interstellar civilization for generations to come. Veltar found himself in the strange position of being a prisoner who was treated better than most guests, and his biosenses detected genuine concern for his welfare from the human crew. These creatures who had destroyed his fleet and ended his military career were now making sure he had proper food and medical care and comfortable quarters for the journey to their home world. The Zephyrian commander began to understand that humans were not just technologically different but morally different as well, and they seemed to believe that defeating an enemy created an obligation to care for survivors rather than an opportunity for revenge. This concept was so alien to his species that his bio-interface could barely process the emotional patterns he was detecting. The journey to Earth took 2 weeks, and during that time, Veltar learned more about humans than his species had discovered about any other civilization in their entire military history. The Zephyrian commander was given access to human databases and educational materials, and what he found challenged every assumption his people had made about intelligent life in the universe. Humans had evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill them with weather that could freeze or burn or flood entire continents, and animals that were bigger and stronger and faster than the fragile creatures that somehow became the dominant species. They had survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions and asteroid impacts that would have ended most civilizations before they began. Amy Turner spent hours each day teaching Veltar about human history and biology and technology, while his biosenses tried to process information that seemed impossible to believe. These creatures had no natural weapons or armor or enhanced abilities, but they had conquered their hostile world through intelligence and cooperation and an endless willingness to build tools for every problem they encountered. The Goliath entered Earth's solar system, and Veltar saw through the ship's viewports a small blue world that looked peaceful and beautiful from space. His bio-interface detected no signs of the massive military installations or orbital weapons platforms that protected the homeworlds of every other advanced species. Earth seemed almost defenseless. Despite being the origin point of the galaxy's most powerful warship, Captain Morrison explained that humans preferred to keep their military assets hidden or mobile rather than building obvious fortifications that could become targets for enemy attack. The Goliath was one of 12 Titan-class warships that patrolled human space, but there were hundreds of smaller vessels and thousands of defensive platforms that could not be detected by conventional sensors. As they approached Earth orbit, Veltar was amazed to see space filled with peaceful civilian traffic, including cargo ships and passenger liners and scientific research vessels that traveled without military escorts. No other species in the galaxy allowed undefended ships to operate near their homeworlds, but humans seemed confident that their hidden defenses were adequate protection. The alien commander was brought to Earth's surface, where he met with representatives from the human government and military leadership who wanted to understand Zephyrian culture and technology. Instead of interrogating him like a prisoner, they treated him like an expert consultant whose knowledge could help prevent future conflicts between their species. Ben Carter had spent the voyage learning Zephyrian language and bioelectric communication protocols, and he now served as official translator for diplomatic meetings between Veltar and human leaders. The young communications officer had become fascinated by alien technology, and he asked detailed questions about bioelectric interfaces and organic computer networks. Earth's cities amazed Veltar because they were clearly designed for comfort and beauty rather than military defense, and the human population seemed to live without fear of attack or invasion. Children played in parks while their parents worked in offices and factories and research laboratories that produced the technology that had defeated his supposedly invincible fleet. The Zephyrian commander was invited to address the United Earth Assembly, and his speech was broadcast across the galaxy through quantum communication networks that reached every inhabited world. He spoke about the battle at Kepler Station and the demonstration of human technological superiority that had ended Zephyrian expansion forever. His words carried across space, to his own people and to the dozens of species that had suffered under Zephyrian raids for centuries, and the message was simple but profound. Humans were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, and they possessed weapons and defenses that made traditional military conquest impossible. The age of raiding and slavery was over. Lisa Parker had been monitoring galactic communication networks during their journey, and she reported that major changes were already happening throughout known space. Species that had been enemies for generations were forming alliances and trade agreements, while others were dismantling military installations that were now useless against human technology. The footage from the battle at Kepler Station spread from world to world and showed other predatory species exactly what would happen if they threatened human civilians or allies. The images of Zephyrian ships being destroyed by kinetic weapons and the massive dreadnought being disabled by a single near miss from the antimatter cannon convinced even the most aggressive civilizations to reconsider their military policies. Ryan Wells had become something of a celebrity among human military personnel for his role in the battle, and he was promoted to weapons chief for the entire Titan-class fleet. His precise targeting and careful selection of appropriate firepower had demonstrated human military doctrine that emphasized overwhelming force combined with precision and restraint. Veltar was eventually returned to his own people, but not as a prisoner or exile, but as an ambassador carrying a message of peace and cooperation from humanity to the Zephyrian Empire. His biointerface had been modified with human quantum technology that allowed him to interface with both organic and synthetic systems for the first time in galactic history. The Zephyrian commander brought with him plans for biosynthetic hybrid technology that combined the best aspects of human artificial intelligence with alien bioelectric systems, and this cooperation led to advances that benefited both species. Former enemies became research partners, and the galaxy entered a new age of scientific discovery and peaceful exploration. Other predatory species received the transmitted records from the battle and studied them carefully before making their own decisions about whether to continue raiding defenseless civilizations. Most of them concluded that the risks now outweighed any potential benefits, and they began looking for legitimate ways to obtain the resources they needed through trade rather than conquest. The galaxy had found new leadership in the form of a species that combined overwhelming military power with genuine moral principles and a willingness to share their technology. With former enemies who proved they could change their behavior, humans became the protectors and teachers that civilized space had been waiting for without knowing it. The small blue world that had seemed so defenseless was revealed to be the center of a new galactic order based on cooperation rather than conquest, and the impossible mountain that moved through the void became the symbol of hope for species that had lived in fear for too long. Humanity had arrived among the stars, and nothing would ever be the same again. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the biggest ship humanity had ever built, and his hands shook just a little as he watched the stars through the main window. The UES Goliath was 12 kilometers long and 3 kilometers wide, and it carried enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. But right now it felt small in the endless black of space. He had been captain for 2 years and still could not believe they had trusted him with this monster of a ship. Lisa Parker sat at her station and watched the screens that showed everything around them for millions of kilometers in every direction. She was the best tactical officer in the human fleet, and her job was to spot trouble before it found them. Her fingers moved across the glowing buttons and displays like she was playing music, and the ship responded to every touch. She looked up at the captain and her face was serious. The distress signal from Kepler mining station had been playing for 3 days now, and it was getting weaker. Someone was attacking the station, and the people there were running out of time. The station was on the very edge of human space where the rules were different and pirates and raiders liked to hunt. It was a bad place to be alone and defenseless. Danny Brooks worked in the engine room deep inside the Goliath where the fusion reactors hummed with power that could light up entire cities. He was the chief engineer, and he knew every pipe and wire and circuit in the massive ship. The engines were his babies, and he talked to them like they were alive. Today they were running perfectly, and he was proud of the work his team had done to keep everything working. The bridge was quiet, except for the soft sounds of computers and machines doing their jobs. Amy Turner sat at the science station and studied data about the aliens they might be facing. She was a doctor who specialized in alien life forms, and she had spent years learning about the different species that lived in the galaxy. Most of them were not friendly to humans. The main screen lit up with an image of the Kepler system, and everyone could see the mining station surrounded by strange ships that moved in patterns unlike anything human pilots used. The alien vessels were sleek and curved like the bodies of hunting fish, and they circled the station like predators waiting for the right moment to strike. Ben Carter handled communications, and his job was to listen to everything the aliens were saying to each other. He wore a headset that translated their words into English, and what he heard made his stomach turn. The aliens were not just attacking the station for supplies or money. They were hunting humans like animals and planning to take prisoners. The Zephyrians were known across the galaxy as raiders and slavers who had destroyed dozens of civilizations over the centuries. They moved in fast ships and struck without warning and left nothing but empty worlds behind them. No one had ever successfully fought them off, and their reputation for cruelty was legendary among the stars. Ryan Wells sat at the weapons station and checked the status of every gun and missile and energy weapon on the massive ship. The Goliath carried more firepower than any ship ever built by humans, and Ryan knew exactly how to use all of it. His screen showed green lights for every system, which meant they were ready for battle if the captain gave the order. The mining station sent another weak yo transmission, and the voice of the station commander could barely be heard through the static. He was asking for help and saying that the aliens were preparing to board the station. There were 300 civilians on that station, and they had no way to defend themselves against military raiders. Kate Phillips plotted their course through space and calculated how long it would take to reach the station. She was the navigation officer, and her job was to get the ship where it needed to go as fast as possible. The Goliath was huge, but it could move faster than most people believed, and Kate knew how to squeeze every bit of speed from the massive engines. The captain made his decision, and his voice carried to every corner of the ship through the communication system. All hands were to report to battle stations and prepare for combat. The crew had trained for this moment, but none of them had ever faced real aliens in a real battle. They were about to find out what humans could do when they were angry. Claire Adams worked at the science station next to Amy, and her job was to analyze alien technology and find weaknesses they could exploit. She had studied the Zephyrian ships for months and knew their weapons and shields and engines better than most Zephyrians did. Today her knowledge would be put to the test. The Goliath moved through space like a mountain flying through the void, and its approach sent ripples through the gravitational fields that the alien sensors could detect. The Zephyrians had never seen anything like it, and their transmissions showed confusion and fear as they tried to understand what was coming toward them. Nick Davis commanded the security forces on the ship, and his Marines were ready for anything the aliens might try. He had served in 3 wars before joining the Goliath crew, and he knew that battles could be won or lost in the first few minutes. His men and women were the best fighters humanity had ever produced. The distance to the Kepler system grew smaller with each passing hour, and soon they would face an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for generations. But the Goliath was different from any ship that had ever challenged the Zephyrians, and the crew was ready to show the aliens what human determination looked like when it was backed up by the most powerful weapons ever created.